Hello. In this video we're going to continue on with the Crossroads tutorial series, and we're going to start on the Technomancy section. So what is Technomancy? Well, the final plan for Crossroads is that there's going to be 3 different paths you can go down. So you're going to have the stuff you start with, the early game stuff, that's basically everything that was shown in the videos previous to this one. And then once you finish all that, you are presented with a choice between 3 paths: Technomancy, Alchemy, and Witchcraft. And in single player, you can choose all 3, and in multiplayer, you can only choose 1, although there's a config option to change it so that you can do all 3 in multiplayer or only pick 1 in single player, and so on. Currently, only Technomancy is implemented. Alchemy and Witchcraft have not been added yet, so right now the choice is kind of obvious. Each path is planned to be designed towards a different playstyle. So Technomancy is designed to be very, very complicated to use. Nothing is simple, obvious, or even that safe. Quite a few devices in Technomancy can fail catastrophically if misused. On the other hand, if you can use the things in Technomancy properly, they can be very powerful. In theory, Technomancy will be the most powerful of the 3 branches, but also the hardest. Alchemy and Witchcraft are not yet implemented, so those plans don't matter right now. So Technomancy is themed around the manipulation of time, and there's a bunch of lore related to that in the Mysterious Journal, but we won't talk about that in this video, really. So to get started in Technomancy, you first have to discover the time element, which I accidentally did in the previous video. It's right here. Once you've discovered time, you can make something called a you can make this block before you've discovered time, but you can't use it until you have discovered time. This is a detailed crafter. As you can see, it's rather expensive, requiring 4 tin ingots. And if I place it down, it's a crafting table. You can craft things in it like any other crafting table. Right. However, this is interesting because it has the potential to craft items from Technomancy as well as, once they're implemented, Alchemy and Witchcraft. However, to be allowed to craft things in Technomancy first, you have to start the Technomancy path, and you're not allowed to start it until you've discovered the time element. So what I need to do is I need 9 bronze gears. And if I place a bronze gear in each slot, and I have discovered the time element, this won't do anything if I haven't discovered time yet, but I have discovered it, the gears will disappear and the gear icon will light up. That is not specific to this table, that is specific to my player. So any table will now have the gear lit up for me and for no one else. They can unlock Technomancy separately, though. I am now allowed to craft Technomancy recipes in a detailed crafter. If I press U on this detailed crafter, JEI will show me the Technomancy recipes, and you can see they're Technomancy because they've got a little orange gear icon. One of the Technomancy recipes is also a way to cheaply make detailed crafters, but you need a detailed crafter to do the recipe, so the first one you're going to be using 4 tin ingots, and for later ones you can use tin nuggets instead. It's part of Technomancy. Now, in order to so now we've unlocked the Technomancy recipes, and now that I've done this, a section has appeared in the book. This section was not here before. Now it is, of course. The basic material of Technomancy, along with bronze and the others like iron, is copshoium. And there's, of course, lore about this. Now, to make copshoium is quite difficult. As you can see, we need to put molten copshoium in a fluid cooling chamber like you make copper ingots. Where do you get molten copshoium? Well, I'm pressing R on this and nothing's coming up. Because you don't make this in a heating crucible. You have to make it in something which is documented in the book, of course, called a copshoium creation chamber. This device here, which is, of course, a Technomancy recipe. And this thing is not easy to use either. It's quite a challenge, in fact. There's two ways to make molten copchoium. There's the one you have to start out with, and then once you've delved deeper into Technomancy, which requires copchoium, there is a more advanced way to make copchoium that's also much cheaper. But for now, before we've got any copchoium, to make our first amount to get started with, we'll need to use molten copper. So this block, if I right-click with my Omnimeter, has an internal tank. This thing also has two fluid ports. Let me just put it up higher so you can see. The bottom one on the top, one on the bottom. The interesting thing about these fluid ports is that the bottom one is an output only, but the top one you can input or output to. Why is this interesting? Well, fluid tubes, if you recall, if they're connected to something that can only output a fluid, they will just draw as much fluid as they can. If they're connected to something that can input or output a fluid, they'll equalize their pressure or their contents divided by their capacity with whatever they're connected to. So if we connect to the top, we'll have equal pressure in the tube and the machine, and if we connect to the bottom, we'll just pull all the fluid out of the machine. And this is going to be important. So to actually make molten copchoium with this machine, on paper it's quite simple, in practice it's quite difficult. You need to insert molten copper into this machine through the top because the bottom can only extract. And then you need to strike this machine with a time beam from any of these sides with the yellow spot. That being a beam of the time element from the magic system. And because you need copchoium created from this machine for basically everything in Technomancy, this is one of the reasons you need to discover time before you're allowed to unlock Technomancy. Then the molten copper in this machine will turn to molten copchoium, which you can pull out the bottom, or I guess the top as well, if you were to design a system for that. Now, of course there's a catch. In fact, there's several. The first one is that you need to get the power of the time beam right. If the power is too low, nothing happens. If the power is too high, then it will destroy the contained molten copper instead of turning it into molten copchoium. You just lose the contents. So you need to hit it in the right range. The power of the beam is, the power equals the amount of fluid divided by 72. Give or take 1. And by give or take 1, that means you have a safety margin of 1. So you're allowed to be a power that's 1 below or 1 above whatever the number you get from this formula. So it's a safety range. It's a range, not just one particular power. So you need to get that right, first of all. Also, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio of molten copper to molten copchoium. It's a 9 molten copchoium. 9 millibuckets of molten copchoium will be made for every 5 millibuckets of molten copper. Now, because it's 144 millibuckets for an ingot of copper or copchoium in a fluid cooling chamber, that means that you could put 5 ingots worth of molten copper in this thing to get 9 ingots of molten copchoium out. And this thing has a capacity for up to 9 ingots worth of molten metal. And if you were to, so what's going to happen is it's going to increase, when you hit it with the time beam and convert it to copchoium, the amount of liquid stored in it is going to increase. And if the amount increases to above its capacity, the machine will burst. And by burst, I mean this block will be replaced by a source block of molten copchoium. Basically, if I had messed it up when I hit it with the time beam and the contained liquid had expanded to more than its capacity, this would happen. Basically, which, while it does give you some molten copchoium, is not very good because you've just lost your machine. So that's why it's so important, the whole matching its pressure with the pipe above thing, because if you overfill this machine with molten copper and then strike it with a time beam, you'll break it. So you need some sort of system that will regulate the pressure. And there are ways to do this. You could use redstone tubes to a compare. You could, for example, here's just an idea. I'm not going to fully design the system in front of you, but you could do something like have this, and then you would have these are redstone fluid tubes, of course. Just connect these up. And we're going to say that in this line is some source of molten copper, and that on this line is some place where let's say some bunch of tanks that can store molten copper and will eventually just put everything back in this line, something like that. And then you would say have a comparator, or a ratiator, would also work, measuring this tank, and you say if it's below a certain fullness, connect this line and let more flow in, and if it's above a certain fullness, connect this line and let some flow out, and you could try and have something regulate the pressure that way. That is one way to do it. There are several. And then once you're ready, you strike it with a time beam, and then you can pull all your molten copper out the bottom. Speaking of pulling things out the bottom, if there is molten copper in the chamber, and you try to add molten copper from the top, it will destroy the molten copper. It won't break the machine, but you'll lose your copper. And similarly, if there is copper in the chamber and you try to put copper in, you'll lose the copper that way as well. So you need to make sure to have some sort of redstone tube down here that you connect and disconnect, and make sure that you never mix your copper and molten and copper. And then you simply put your molten copper into a fluid cooling chamber, one of these, and it will give you copper ingots. Now, this process is not fully automatable. The reason being, you can't fully automate obtaining molten copper. There's nothing in Crossroads that will obtain copper for you. You could automate it so that you put in some copper ingots into a chest and come back later, and there'll be another chest that has copper ingots in it, and that you can do because you can fully automate the production of the time beams and the melting of copper down into ingots and into grinding the copper down and then melting it into molten copper, and then this whole system. But you can't fully automate the production all the way, which sounds odd, doesn't it? Because Crossroads is all about fully automating things. Well, as I said before, there is later on a way to run this machine in a more complicated way where it's cheaper to run, and that is fully automatable because that later thing will allow you to make molten copper with distilled water instead of molten copper. So instead of making copper out of copper, you make it out of water, basically. Well, distilled water. So that is later down the line and would require using fields, which is, well, we'll get to that. So once you've got your copper ingots, incredibly unattractive orange substance here. I'm not a very good artist. Don't sue me. Stab me or anything else. You've now got the basic material for Technomancy, and of course this stuff can be made into nuggets and blocks as well. That's a normal crafting recipe, in fact. Now, one of the simplest uses for it is if you make copper gears. These gears have a very interesting property. Most of the gear materials that you've seen thus far have had similar masses and I values, though it's not really made much of a difference for the most part. Maybe a few specialized cases you'd particularly care. Copper, however, has an I value of 0 and a mass of 0. Well, what would happen if you look at your equations for rotary systems if you used 0 mass gears? Well, it's very, very useful, actually. Let me get this. me get a writer instead, a cheat mode writer that's much more powerful for demonstration and testing. And let's just have a simple master axis with a gold gear on it, right? It speeds up, yeah. It's not hugely interesting. And as I put more gold gears on, the whole system slows down because the energy has to be distributed to spinning the other gears, right? So as the network gets bigger, it gets harder to get it to the same speeds. And I'm going to attach some Kopchoium gears, which have 0 mass and an I value of 0. This system is not slowing down. Well, it is due to just normal energy loss, but adding extra gears isn't making it slow down anymore. It's as easy to spin 1 gold gear as 1 gold gear in a million Kopchoium gears. Because these have an I value of 0, and if you remember your equation for energy, energy of a gear equals I times the speed squared divided by 2. And if your I value is 0, then the energy is 0, so none of the energy has to go into spinning this gear. And if you look, energy equals 0. Well, in this, it has a non-zero moment of inertia, so energy is that large number. And the speed is, in this case, going to be determined by the gears that don't have 0 mass, because we know that these have the same radii, so they have to spin at the same speed, because they're directly attached like this, right? So if I were to have a system with only Kopchoium gears, and I tried to spin it, what would happen? Well, nothing. It won't spin. The reason being, there has to be at least one gear that's not massless to determine what speed everything else will spin. So you can't have an entirely massless system yet. However, this is a normal master axis. There are other versions of master axes as part of Technomancy which will allow you to have a network entirely made of 0 mass gears. There's quite a few special master axes, in fact. Flux regulated, multiplication, addition, equals, less than, greater than, redstone, square root. The whole list goes on and on and on. Sine, cosine, arc cosine. Yeah. And we're going to talk about all of these, although most of them are once you've seen a few of them, it's pretty easy to guess what most of the others do. So that's Kopchoium gears, and of course they do have toggle gear variants and large gear variants and all that. So now that we've got our Kopchoium gears, let's look at some of these. Let's look at also, by the way, I wanted to mention something before I forget. Once you have unlocked Technomancy, there is a much cheaper, well, you could debate whether or not it's cheaper, I kind of think of it as cheaper, recipe for a normal master axis. How am I not seeing it? Somewhere around here. It's probably I've probably passed it like 5 times. Hold on. Oh, no, I know it's wrong. I pressed U on a Kopchoium ingot, and it's not made of Kopchoium ingots. That's the problem. Right, I'm being silly. It's right around here. Let me just do this. If you've unlocked Technomancy, you can make a master axis using iron nuggets instead of iron ingots, but then you have to use a Kopchoium nugget as well. Is it cheaper? I think it is, but you might not. You still have access to the old recipe, of course. And you're going to need a lot of master axes for Technomancy because there's a lot of stuff based on gears. So now that I've mentioned there's some special master axes, let's look at some of them. Let's start with a particularly simple one, the Redstone Axis. And almost all the special master axes contain a normal master axis as part of the recipe. The Redstone Axis doesn't even take any Kopchoium to make. So this thing is controlled by a redstone signal, and it's not just an on-off either. If I were to attach some gears, let me just for simplicity's sake, let me just do something here. I'm attaching a tin gear to the front of this thing, and a tin gear is very light, right? Very low moment of inertia. So it doesn't take much energy to spin it. And I'm attaching to the back of this thing, which is defined as the side opposite the front, I'm attaching another gear, and this one I'm making a gold gear, which is a gear that's very, very heavy, high moment of inertia, so it takes a lot of energy to spin. And I'm just going to give this a spin. So there is, of course, some energy in this gear, right? Quite a lot, in fact. Now I'm going to this is for this current demonstration. I'm going to want a weaker redstone signal. What is this? Is going to be strength 1? No, it's 5. Maybe so. That's 2. Dang it. All right, here's a strength of 1. Well, if we look at this gear, it's now spinning with a speed of exactly 1. Now, of course, to spin, it's got to get energy from somewhere. Where is it getting the energy from? Well, this master axis, this redstone axis, controls the speed of the attached gears to be exactly equal to the strength of the redstone signal. But the energy doesn't come from it nowhere, so it gets the energy from a gear attached to the back. Okay? Now, if there isn't enough energy available, then this gear will just simply stop spinning entirely. It won't just go slower. It will either be operating according to the redstone signal, or if there's not enough energy, completely stop. This does still have loss, by the way. So you're going to need to keep supplying energy here. And if I were to add energy, let me just slow this down as a demonstration. Alright, if I were to add energy to this gear, that would normally make it go above a speed of 1, but this redstone master axis doesn't allow that, so instead it's pushing the extra energy to the gear attached to the back. Now if I were to use a tin gear here and a gold gear here, if I try and set this to go to a particularly high speed, hold on, if I try and set this to go to a particularly high speed, it's quite likely that, well, let's say this gear is spinning with a speed of 1, and this is set to spin at a speed of 1, which is approximately what's going on here, actually. This won't spin because the amount of energy required to spin a gold gear with a speed of 1 is more than there is in this tin gear at its current speed. So you're going to probably want an energy-dense gear on the back, or quite possibly even a large gear, which will have an enormous I value. And if I have multiple gears attached, then we're going to need that much more energy. Now this isn't drawing enough energy to keep all these gears spinning every tick. I should try and make this clear. This isn't constantly okay, so these gears each have a certain amount of energy in them, right? This isn't subtracting that amount of energy from this gear each tick, because it's still in these gears. What it's currently drawing is that these gears have loss, which would slow them down normally, but it's pulling extra energy from the gear attached to the back, so that they don't slow down, just to counteract the loss. Now, remember how I said you couldn't make a gear network with a normal master axis entirely of zero mass gears, for the reason that there's nothing to control which speed it would spin? Well, now we've got something that controls the speed it would spin. And with a redstone master axis, you're allowed to use Kopshioium gears. And since Kopshioium gears don't need any energy to spin, we don't have to provide a gear attached to the back to provide energy at all. We can just spin these whatever speed we want for free. And I've just given a redstone signal strength of 14, so they're going quite fast. That's extremely fast, in fact, for a normal gear. 8, and so on. And what makes this device even more useful is that it doesn't have to use a normal redstone signal. We can use a ratiator. And if I were to, sure, let's say, what is the signal strength? 2. And then we're going to make this, sure, divide by, whatever this is, but divide by 14. That would be the same as 1/7. And this should be emitting a strength of 1/7. Yeah, that's 1/7, basically. So now these are spinning at a speed of 1/7. And of course, if this radiator were to emit a signal of 1024.6, these would be spinning with a speed of 1024.6. If I were to use a normal gear, there's no place for it to get the energy from to spin this gear. That's why Kopshayam gears are very useful in conjunction with these. Alright, so that's the Redstone Master Axis. There are quite a few other variants of Master Axis, and many of them are quite similar to the Redstone one. For example, if I take this square root axis, and I were to replace the Redstone Axis with it, these gears kept spinning after they were. It's not controlled by a redstone signal. This one, it's controlled instead by, well, the Redstone Master Axis can point horizontally up or down. However, the square root axis can only point horizontally. The reason being that it has 2 inputs instead of 1. The gear you have to attach to provide energy to it, so that to keep the things in the front spinning, if you weren't using entirely zero mass gears, would go on the bottom. And on the back, we put a very different thing. The speed it will set this gear to be will be the square root of the speed of the gear on the back, and it will draw energy / power from the gear attached to the bottom, except it doesn't need energy to spin these gears because they're all zero mass. So we demonstrate this with another Redstone Axis. So this should be a speed of 14, yep. Now this is currently spinning clockwise, which means, counterclockwise, which means it's spinning counterclockwise very fast, in fact, so it's a bit of a blur, which means it's got a negative speed. And as you should know, taking the square root of a negative gives an imaginary number, and we can't have an imaginary speed, so this thing's refusing to spin at all, speed of 0. If I were to change this slightly so that this was a positive speed, that should do it. Now it will work properly. Yeah. Now you might be wondering, what would happen if I connected the output of this thing to its input? It would in effect have this say that its speed is the square root of its own speed. That happens. You don't lose the block, it's dropped as an item as you just saw, but if you connect the output of a master axis that reads a gear to set its speed to its input, it will break the special axis and drop it as an item, because you can't do that. You can't say the speed is the square root of itself. Well, I mean, you can actually. You could, to be fair, square root sort of a special case because you can, then it's 0 or 1. But most of these you couldn't do that. So, anyways, so they'll just break. They'll just pop off. Now, it's kind of getting to be a pain to control this Redstone Axis with levers, especially as I'm going to want to make some demonstrations with some interesting numbers. So I'm going to show you. We saw that it could be controlled by a radiator. Well, we're going to go next to another device, the Redstone keyboard. Once again, doesn't take Kopshayam. If I place one of these down and I open its interface, it's got a single number bar. And I can type letters, but if I try to close and reopen it, the letters will disappear and it'll just say no and reset to 0. Let me type a number. And it's saved. But now I've added a D, which didn't save. Right, and so on. So let's just type a number. So let's do this. 254. Sure. And now we're going to get a radiator. And we're just going to make it read from this Redstone keyboard, and it's just reading the number that I've typed in. So this is good for defining constants. So you don't have to mess around if you want 12.6. You don't have to mess around with ratiators and levers and integers and try and somehow hit 12.6. You can just type in 12.6. Now there is one special case where you can actually type in letters into this thing and it'll understand it. Which is if you type in the word pi, it will read out 3.1415 yada yada, and capital PI works just as well. Yeah. So I'm going to be using this probably instead of levers quite a bit to control the signal strength for some of these Technomancy devices, because, yeah. Alright, so that's a few of the master axes. Let me show, well, some of these I'm not going to bother showing you. I'm just going to tell you what they do because they're sort of self-explanatory now that you've seen the square root of axis. The sine axis is like the square root axis, except it gives the output is the sine function of the input value in radians. Cosine does the cosine value of the inputted speed in radians. The arc sine and arc cosine should be self-explanatory, and if you give them a value from outside of the range of -1 to 1, then it'll just output a speed of 0 because that would be undefined in real life. If you try to take the arc cosine of 2, the answer is undefined. So anytime these things would get an answer of undefined, they output 0. There is the multiplication axis, which is somewhat unique among them in the fact it actually has a decent model. No, I think it's decent. I think it's pretty cool, actually. So we take this thing, and blue and orange, as you can see, one side's orange, the other's blue. And we've also got an axial connection on the top and on the bottom. The bottom is where you would provide an energy source gear. Of course, if you're using only Copshoium, that's optional. You don't need the energy source gear. And this will, quite simply, the output speed will be the speed it's got on the back multiplied by the speed on top. Now, if you don't want these two gears to connect, you can place a block here. They won't connect because there's a block in the way. You could also connect, for example, two axles. I could place it vertically, or an axle and a gear, and so on. And that'll. So, what did I do? Oh, I think I accidentally misplaced a block and connected the two inputs. Hold on. Anyway, so yeah, it just multiplies the two. So of course, using Copshoium gears is fine. And like I accidentally demonstrated, don't connect the output to any of the inputs or breaks. Now, if you want this thing to do division, give it a redstone signal. And you'll see the model sort of flipped around. This is now in division mode because it's got a redstone signal. And the output number will be the speed from the back divided by the speed from the top. And if the speed on top is 0, the output is 0. Also, because I don't ask me why, I just feel proud of this model and I want to show it spinning. So if I could just do that for a moment. Let me just hit this. Let's demonstrate this thing by multiplying 5 by 2. Seems like perfectly fine. There is one important thing I should note. This does not output a speed that is the two inputs multiplied together. It's -1 times the two inputs multiplied together. And similarly, if you divide, it's -1 times the two inputs divided. There is a reason for this, which I don't want to go into the details of, but if you were to closely examine the model, you might be able to work out the reason. It really doesn't matter because to flip the sign of the speed of a gear, you just have to, well, it's with the directions, so it will flip every gear. So it really doesn't matter, honestly. But just so you know, so let's do 5 times 6. And if we look at this model, well, let's see here. Is this set to divide? I would like to apologize for the fact that a bug seems to have been reintroduced in the latest version, what with updating to 1.12 and all. I'm still finding all the bugs from the update. It seems like it's... Oh, no, it's not a bug. It's the fact that this... Never mind, I'm just stupid. I'm just incredibly stupid. It's not a bug. It's getting a redstone signal through the axis. Right, it's not bugged at all, actually. Sorry, I'm just stupid. It's not bugged. Right, so we just move this over a block. It's working perfectly fine. By mistake. Just wondering why it was dividing. Because it was good. Yeah. Okay, so if we do 6 times 5 times -1, that should be -30. It's still in divide mode. What? Yeah, it is actually bugged. I'll fix that. Don't worry. It doesn't seem to be switching back from divide mode to multiply mode when it should be. I'll fix that. 1.12 bugs. The updating. There. -30. And as you can see, there's a full model involving springs and gears and belts. The belts aren't animated, but everything else on it is. So, yeah. There is also similarly an addition axis. Input. The output on this is actually the top, and then power supply on the bottom if you're not using petroleum gears. And the output speed is just the sum of the two input speeds. However, there's no subtraction axis, and this doesn't have a subtraction mode, for the simple reason that if you want them to subtract, make sure that one of the gears has got the sign flipped. Because let's say that I wanted to subtract speed A from speed B, I need to make sure that when it reaches this axis, speed A is positive and speed B is negative. Based on design all of this. Did I say that we're subtracting this from this? Yeah. In which case, that would do it. And that would subtract, because one of those would be negative and the other positive. Let's see, what are the other axes I need to mention? Flux regulated master axis we'll get to later. That's for something else. What is there is? Let's see here. Okay, that leaves these three axes: the greater than, the equal to, or sorry, equals axis, and the less than axis. These basically do what their name says, and on these power gear goes on the bottom. The equals axis will only, you give it 2 speeds. The front gear will only spin if these 2 speeds on the inputs are equal to each other. And if they are, the output gear will have the speed of the input gears. Right. The less than axis, 2 inputs, top and bottom, top and back, power on the bottom, and output on the front. Will flow. The output speed of the greater than axis, which, actually this is less than. The output speed of the less than axis is equal to the back input speed if and only if the back input speed is less than the top input speed, otherwise it's 0. And the greater than axis is the exact opposite. The output is equal to the input from the back if and only if the back input is greater than in speed than the top input, otherwise it's 0. Those are the mathematics axes. One last redstone device before I end this video and leave the more interesting things for the next one is the Redstone Registry. It's It's made of 4 redstone keyboards, some copper and some tin, so it's rather expensive. This is one that's just been placed down, and it's got a quite complicated interface. But, well, I'll show you how to use it. So if we open it up, it's got entry 0, 0, and I can, if I press this button, I'm adding things to the list. So entry 0 is 0, entry 1 is 0, entry 2 is 0, and I can move up and down with these arrows. Now you see here that the first one in this list is yellow. If I make it so, if I let's say I go down to the first entry 1 instead of entry 0, and I press this pound sign, then this one will become yellow. And I'll explain what this means in a moment. I can also remove an entry. Now, let's see. Now currently, the one I have selected, which is the one at the top of my screen of the 3, is number 1. Now it's number 2, and now it's number 0. If I can use this text box to change the value of the one I have selected, and it can only store numbers or pi. Right. If I press the minus button, it will remove the one that I currently have selected and shift everything over. I can also use the keys, never mind. I can also use the arrow keys on my keyboard, the up and down arrow key, to navigate up and down this list, so I don't have to use the ones in the interface. So this can store up to 64 things on this numbers on this list, so since it starts at index 0, the final one will be numbered 63. Now currently the one that's yellow is entry 1, which has a value of 6. If we try to measure this thing with a ratiator, it's outputting 6. And if I were to set the yellow one to be 5, it's outputting 5. If I make the yellow one this, which is a value of 242, it's up for 242. So far this isn't particularly useful. It's sort of like, well, where this gets more interesting is that we can cycle between these values with a redstone signal. The uses for this block are sort of it's got very specific, this isn't a block you'll be using a lot of, or you won't use it for very many things, but there are some things and some methods of automating things where this block is essential, and I'm going to leave you, well, you may find yourself needing something that works exactly like this block, and in a build, and that's why this block exists. And, well, I did say you could cycle between its values with a redstone signal, which is exactly what it's going to do. So currently, yellow one is 242, emit signal of 242. Now, if I give this thing a redstone signal of 1, which is what it's going to happen when I right-click its divide mode, it's cycled to now 25. The next entry in the list. Now, it might be a little confusing. You might be thinking right now, if you give it a signal of 1, it'll go to entry 1 in the list. That's not what's happening. When you give it a signal of 1, it goes to the next thing in the list. So now it's at number 2, and now it's at number 3, and so on. If I give it a signal strength of 2, it'll skip 2 things in the list. So now it's at 5. If I do it again, it'll loop, but so now we're at 3, increment by 2, we're at 5, and then we loop again, past 0 and go to 1. Right, and if I give it a signal strength of 3, you can guess what happens. Right. Probably this is going to be most useful when given signal strengths of 1, and it operates on the pulse as well, by the way, not a constant signal won't make it keep cycling. So this can be useful when you have some system that operates based on a redstone signal strength, and you want to give it a sequence of instructions in the form of redstone signal strengths. You could keep cycling. You could say, okay, what's the first value? Well, it's It's 242. Okay, give it a signal strength of 1. What's the second value? Okay, it's 25. Okay, do something based on that. Now 2, now 9, and so on. Oh, and I should mention these can of course be decimals. Alright, I'm going to end this video here, and the next video we're going to probably start talking about either the gateway or prototype. We'll probably start with the gateway next video, and then we'll probably carry on and start with prototyping. So I'll end this video here.